Right. Welcome everyone to our first talk of the second season of the Hispanic and Latin American Studies Film Club. And we have launched it this year with a new name on YouTube, Cinema Chat. And that's our YouTube channel where you can find, last year's 2 talks. And shortly after today, our first talk of the second season. And as is custom, our first talk tends to have a Halloween theme. And I think today's talk follows in that custom. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. Enrique Ajurria Ibarra is a senior assistant professor at the Universidad de las Américas, Puebla, in Mexico. He has published several articles and chapters on Mexican Gothic horror cinema. He is the editor-in-chief of the online peer-reviewed journal Studies in Gothic Fiction. He is currently exploring the Gothic in the Archie Comics universe and continues looking at Gothic and horror in Mexican film and literature. His talk today, as you can see, the title is The Horror of Motherhood, Haunting, Witchcraft, and Mexican Womanhood in Michelle Garza Cervera's Huesera, or The Bone Woman. Enrique, welcome to the Film Club.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this, to be honest, but it's been also been very stressful. It feels like I've been kind of cursed for October as well. I prepared a presentation in which I've tried to set up my initial thoughts about the film, and I think that could be very useful for the nature of your film club in terms of what I can observe and see where we can take it from there with, a conversation and, questions from the public. So I hope you've watched Huesera, which is quite disturbing. So I'm going to go right away and read my talk, if that's okay with you, and thank you again. Right, okay. So let me just check. Great. Okay, so there you are. Great. The opening sequence of Michelle Garza Cervera's debut feature-length film, Huesera, or The Bone Woman, sets up a certain aspect of beatification and hope that is jarred by a few significant details. The screen slowly fades into a close-up of the steps on Tepeyac Hill in northern Mexico City. A cushion is seen being placed on these steps as a person starts to climb up on their knees to the shrine of a monumental Virgen de Guadalupe. The camera cuts to a medium close-up of the film's protagonist, Valeria, as she watches bemused the penitents who are climbing with much effort to the shrine. The scene is interspersed by different shots of the forested hill and a few glimpses of the statue of the Virgen de Guadalupe at the top. As Valeria approaches the summit, the audience can hear the off-key singing of a family of devotees chanting to the monumental statue. Once they reach the monument, Valeria's mother, Mari Carmen, her sister Veronica, and her aunt Chabela pray for the protagonist to become pregnant. The sequence is set up in a way that we can acknowledge Valeria looks at the shrine, the penitents, and the devotees with a bit of disbelief. Still, she gives in to her mother's wishes and accepts a sign of the cross on her belly as a sign of goodwill. Despite the sanctity of the setting, the end of the scene feels uncanny. The off-key, high-pitched singing of the devotees and the monumental golden statue dominating the screen give off a certain sense of fear rather than peace. It is important to notice that Mari Carmen does not perform the sign of the cross on Valeria herself, but on her belly or her womb. Her body becomes the place that needs the miracle, rather than Valeria herself, a subject. Sanctified by the Virgen de Guadalupe, considered to be the mother of all Mexicans, they all hope Valeria will get pregnant soon. As the camera tracks away from the hill, the monumental statue transitions into a bonfire inside a dark room. The foreboding is inevitable. The sanctified wish for motherhood, for childbearing, that the initial sin portrays is transformed into something dreadful. Garza Cervera's horror film has rightfully become one of the most noted Mexican horror films in recent times. International critics have lauded the intense psychological content that focuses on the fear of motherhood and postpartum depression, which, according to Peter Bradshaw from The Guardian, feels similar to Polanski's Repulsion or Rosemary's Baby. Katie Rife at RogerEverett.com claims the film belongs to the subcategory of pregnancy as body horror, combined with a haunted house element. Natalia Winkleman from the New York Times considers that Huesera is the type of staggering supernatural nightmare that is as transfixing and as it is terrifying in its exceptionally specific deconstruction of the trials of pregnancy. While Carlos Aguilar from the Los Angeles Times argues that this debut horror film is as effectively blood-curdling as it is intellectually incisive. The film was also awarded at different film festivals such as Tribeca, Sitges, and Morelia, and was also nominated for 17 Ariel Awards from the Mexican Academy of Cinematographic Arts and Sciences, including the categories of Best Film, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Cinematography, Best Sound, Best Editing, Best Art Direction, and Best Visual Effects. The film won for Best Original Screenplay, Best Makeup, Best Special Effects, and Best Debut Film. The film has been well praised, even though its subject matter, as the reviewers have stated, provides a horrifying look at pregnancy and the status of women in Mexico. What Huesera presents is a chilling representation of social and cultural expectations regarding the role of women as childbearers, trapped in the domestic and maternal spheres. It is important to notice that the monster itself, the bone woman, is barely seen on screen. Nevertheless, what it represents is the anxiety of social pressure, of the subjectification of woman into a single role that risks stripping away her identity. The Huesera is that darker side that reacts violently to the expectations of womanhood. The most important aspect of this monster is the cracking of bones. Sound and image are effectively constituted in the film and present the audience with a creature that is visually and orally disturbing. And I would like to highlight that the very core of the film, the key to its interpretation, is the cracking itself, both in sight and sound. In Garza Cervera's film, the cracking of the bone woman is not just bones cracking. It is in fact the cracking and splitting of a constructed identity to satisfy a sense of domesticated acceptance of womanhood that has just become too swollen, too regulated. The Huesera is the fearful projection of apparent happiness monstrified, out of joint, haunting, eating up, hurting the self and others, disclosing the social and cultural process of othering a Mexican woman is subject to. The film plot revolves around Valeria, a well-to-do young woman who decides to have a baby with her partner Raul. After going with her family to pray to the Virgen de Guadalupe, she successfully gets pregnant, but the prospect of motherhood unleashes a violent creature, a deformed bone woman who crawls and threatens Valeria, her family, and even her baby after she is born. Afraid of this monster that follows her everywhere, she gets help from her aunt and a group of brujas who perform a ritual to expel the malignant entity that seems to inhabit her body. The ritual is successful, but in the process, Valeria realizes that she is unable to fulfill her duty as a mother, thus abandoning Raul and her daughter. During the film, we also get a glimpse of Valeria's past, her social upbringing, and her attraction for her friend Octavia, aspects of her life that she apparently had not shared with her partner, and that gradually make the protagonist reconsider her life choices. Motherhood is certainly the core theme in the film, but it is important to think about its intersectionality as well. The social and cultural expectations of motherhood speak about the condition of woman, but the film also evidences that this is a matter of class. It is evident that Valeria has moved up the social scale from a working class neighborhood to live with a well-to-do man. I suggest that in Huesera, Valeria's pregnancy works in a double way. It can help guarantee her current class status and at the same time satisfy family and cultural expectations of her role as woman. Thus, as the narrative progresses, the film chillingly reveals the stress and pressure of conforming to a specific idea of woman that is framed by heteronormative and phallic discourses, making Valeria feel trapped and thus unleashing the monstrous entity that is the bone woman. It is clear that the film addresses Valeria's fear of pregnancy and the expectations of motherhood. Even though she claims that she did want to have a baby, it seems as if she has done it to please others, most importantly her partner Raul and her own family. Her intention is mostly based on her desire for a normal life, where she is happily together with a male partner and fulfilling all social and economic expectations, a stable middle-class life, a home, a family. Nevertheless, this prospect is constantly challenged whenever Valeria faces the idea of maternity. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, she does not look entirely convinced about the pilgrimage to the Virgen de Guadalupe shrine to pray for her pregnancy. Likewise, once she finds out she's going to have a baby, she begins to feel threatened by how her own family perceives her. Her sister has 2 children and mocks Valeria for not being able to take care of children properly. At a Mother's Day reunion at her parents' house, Veronica recalls how Valeria accidentally dropped a neighbor's baby the 2 sisters had been babysitting. This tense scene is the moment of the split, where everything leads up to the first sighting of the bone woman. Raul and Valeria go to her parents to celebrate Mother's Day. The audience sees the couple driving across Mexico City from their well-to-do neighborhood to an outskirts working-class borough. Although Valeria seems happy to visit her childhood home, it is evident that she's also stressed. Her pregnancy is now known by everyone. Her mother even thanks the Virgen for the miracle. And she is being welcomed as part of the women that can be honored on this holiday. Valeria, her mother, and her aunt are in the kitchen preparing the meal. Aunt Chabela is cutting a whole chicken when Veronica walks in to serve her daughter a glass of milk. Mari Carmen tells Vero to congratulate her sister for her pregnancy. She does, but she also adds that, and she tells Valeria, your clock was ticking. A quick cut to a close-up of Chabela splitting the chicken open is accompanied by the loud diegetic noise of bones cracking. And that really scared me when I saw it at the cinema. It's like a very, very strong sound editing and volume. The split happens in the domestic space associated with women and where the confrontation between 2 expectations of maternity and the nurturing nature of maternity generates a tense disassociation. Vero is the bearer of children at the right age. Valeria has waited a long time to decide to have children. Vero cares for her children's well-being and confronts Valeria later on at the dinner table about her maternal skills. From here on, Valeria's stress begins to mount, and she begins to crack her fingers constantly as a sign to relieve her tension, both mental and physical. That same night, still on Mother's Day, Valeria sights the Huesera for the first time. The appearance of the bone woman on Mother's Day night could be interpreted as the visual embodied projection of Valeria's feeling of uncertainty towards her pregnancy and the inevitable prospect of being a mother. After the stressful meal at her parents', she is unable to sleep and decides to stroll around her apartment, where she finally glimpses a woman on the building across, jumping off the window and falling to the road. So she's standing on the balcony. And there's a shot where she turns around trying to avoid the sight of the woman falling, and you can see the reflection of Valeria, her reflection on the window in the balcony. Miraculously, the woman survives, but she starts to crawl on the street with her limbs all shattered and broken. Yeah, there it is. Her movements are disjointed. They feel unnatural, unnerving. Valeria calls out to Raúl, but when they look out the window, the street is empty. There are two aspects that are important to notice about the Huesera. First, the audience never gets to see her fully or clearly. And second, the way she moves resembles that of a spider, one of the key symbols in the film. So throughout the film, the Bone Woman is an entity that only Valeria can perceive. Raúl and her family never see her. Also, whenever she encounters this creature, it is always in a slanted way, from behind a window, from the corner of her eye, from a dark corner. For instance, the night that Valeria agrees to babysit her nephew and niece, she becomes angry and stressed because the children are behaving badly. And I think they're doing it on purpose. She rushes into the kitchen to calm herself down by cracking her fingers, cracking them so hard that she even believes that she's broken her fingers. And when she opens her eyes, she sees a barely perceptible figure standing outside the window, and you can see it in one of the images here. It is a brief moment where the audience is able to see a blurry figure illuminated by an outdoor light that flickers off, leaving only Valeria's reflection on the glass. Fearing for their safety, she runs and grabs the children, accidentally hurting them, and locks herself in a bedroom. Terrified, she sees a shadow behind the glass door, an ominous silhouette framed with backlighting. Right at the moment when the figure twists its neck and cracks it, Valeria pushes the alarm button of the neighborhood patrol. Coincidentally, the family dog, who had been barking all night, breaks its neck after pulling too hard on the rope that had been keeping it in place. The Huesera shows up at moments when Valeria becomes too wary or anxious about her own condition as prospective mother. The creature crawls into her apartment at night and haunts her in her sleep. When Raúl confronts Valeria about how she failed to take care of her sister's children, the Bone Woman appears in the dark corner of the baby's room, where Valeria had gone up to have a quick smoke to relieve her tension. That's the other image that you can see here. And you can see Valeria's shadow projected on the wall as well. The crib that Valeria had made lights up in flames in that instant, but the Huesera is nowhere to be seen. The last time that we see this creature in the apartment is the night that Valeria and her baby spend alone. Valeria is exhausted and the baby does not stop crying. Suddenly, Valeria gets up from her bed and starts cracking all the bones in her body. She leaves her room and we only get to see the creature on the baby monitor screen, picking the baby up and leaving. The baby stops crying and all we see is Valeria getting back to bed to sleep. Later that night, Raúl calls her and she realizes the baby is not in her crib. Desperate, she finds it inside the refrigerator. Since the Bone Woman only appears on glass reflections and projections or on the baby monitor screen and the few glimpses the audience perceives from the Bone Woman is from a poorly lit corner of a room or corridor, we can interpret that this monstrous creature is Valeria's mirror image or doppelganger. And that's why I was emphasizing the idea of seeing Valeria's reflection on windows, her shadow projected on the wall as well. The Huesera is unleashed at the time when the protagonist's apparent wish fulfillment to become a mother is severely questioned, releasing as well her doubts and fears about the process and condition of woman as mother. In order to accommodate social expectations, she has to give up what she enjoys more, her work making furniture, to give way to this role that she apparently gives in order to fulfill cultural conventions. At the same time, the Huesera makes Valeria question her current status, not just as a pregnant woman, but as a middle-class, heteronormed female subject. Valeria's conflict stems... Let me just wait for you for a second. Sorry about that. There's a corridor outside my window. Outside my window as well. Anyways, in order to accommodate social expectations, she has to give up what she enjoys more, her work making furniture, to give way to this role that she apparently gives in order to fulfill cultural conventions. At the same time, the Huesera makes Valeria question her current status, not just as a pregnant woman, but as a middle-class, heteronormed female subject. Valeria's conflict stems from the desire to satisfy the desire of others, her partner, her family, her mother-in-law, and her own desire, an independent woman who is not ruled down by social and cultural constraints. In this sense, where is it? Yeah, I'm going back to this one. Sorry about that. In this sense, I want to propose that the Huesera is a projection of undesire. The creature that haunts Valeria is a twofold monstrous fantasy that evidences the complexity of Valeria's own situation. Even though she claims to several people that she did want to get pregnant, there is this other part of her that is constantly doubtful at the prospect of motherhood, with all it entails, the changes in her body, the way the family perceives her, the way society and culture impose on her a notion of maternity that is inherently nurturing, loving, almost saintly. The Huesera is the monstrous manifestation of this conflict, in which her own fears and anxieties suddenly become dangerous, even deadly. At the same time, the Huesera also turns over the idea of desire, the fantasy of normalcy, and reveals an other side to this desire. It is not negative in its entirety, but it is a confrontation with independence and non-heteronormative love, where heterosexual motherhood simply cannot fit in properly. Undesire is thus two-folded and conflicting, monstrous yet revealing of what Valeria is truly wanting and longing. It splits the idea of desire and discloses what is being silenced or kept away from the light of the construction of a socially and culturally determined wish fulfillment. This conflicting idea is perhaps better understood with the spider as symbol in the film. But when Aunt Chabela takes Valeria to see a bruja called Ursula, the woman passes an egg on her body to try to cleanse her. Ursula cracks the egg to reveal the yolk trapped in egg white filaments, a web that seems to be pushing down on the integrity of the egg structure. She claims that Valeria is haunted by a spider, and you can see, the cracked egg in the close-up, in the image in the close-up. A creature that is a mother, but also a predator. The cobweb that it has spun can be read as a protective home, yet it is also a prison. And those are words from Ursula, the bruja, in the scene. Spiders appear for a few seconds in moments of stress and defeat. There is a spider on the wall of Valeria's workshop when she has to pack her tools to adapt the room for the baby, and that's one of the images to the top left. And another spider is seen on the dinner table when Valeria has been confronted by Raúl about Vero's children, and she has to entertain his guests, and that's the image. You can see it. It's also behind the bones. I was just like looking at the scene again, and it's all people eating ribs and chicken and like munching on the bones as well. It's all very disturbing as well. We could also say that the way that the bone woman moves, as I was saying, her disjointed crawling resembles a spider. According to Ursula then, what haunts Valeria is a conflicting and twofold entity that manifests both the protective and destructive aspects of Valeria's condition. It is something fearful, deadly, terrifying, but simultaneously highly protective. The question is, what is this spider trying to protect? Once again, the association with motherhood is split into something desired and not desired, revealing that Valeria is constantly at odds with the imposition of a domestic sense of womanhood that could lead to her being unhappy, unsatisfied, and not being able to feel herself. Thus, the Huesera can be compared with another film monster that also speaks about the trials of motherhood, the Babadook. In Jennifer Kent's horror film, the Babadook is a shadowy creature with elongated arms, I was trying to make that association with spiders too, that threatens to devour Amelia's child, Samuel. In this film, the Babadook is a combination of the weight of maternal responsibility in the face of grief. Amelia's husband died in a car accident the night that Samuel was born. As a single mother, she cannot overcome the loss of her partner, and the film suggests that the Babadook is a projection of Amelia's inability to cope with her condition, as well as being unable to overcome the tragical loss of the father of her child. The Babadook and the Huesera are thus monsters that reveal the contradictory aspect of motherhood, as something expected, as something feared, as something desired, as something dangerous. In Garza Cervera's film, it specifically serves as an instance of confrontation of cultural ideals of womanhood that are constantly tested throughout the narrative. As a film, Huesera is plagued with contrasts that disclose the social and cultural expectations of what it is to be a Mexican woman. From the very beginning of the film, comparisons are established that help confirm the twofold conflict that the bone woman represents. In Valeria's family, we can notice the distinction between the women who are mothers and the women who are not. Mari Carmen and Vero have borne their children and are well perceived despite their weaknesses. And I'd like to mention that Vero is a good single mother, and it is because she lives with her parents who provide for her. So her father acts as this symbol of protection, so she can take care of her children. On the other hand, Aunt Chabela does not have children and is not married. It is also implied that she is a lesbian. Valeria currently stands on the borderline between these two perceptions of women. She wants to be a mother to conform with social expectations, but simultaneously she does not fit with the idea of conventional femininity, associated with the domestic, with passivity, resignation, and religious devotion. Valeria strives to climb the social ladder. She studies in college, works, and lives in a middle-class borough in Mexico City. This class fulfillment is cut short by the cultural impositions of prospective motherhood, which are clearly framed from a hetero-phallo-normative perspective. So Valeria manages to get pregnant, and her family claims that it is because of the pilgrimage to see the Virgen de Guadalupe. In a sense, her pregnancy and maternity is a structure around the idea of saintly and holy femininity, represented with the Virgin as a symbol of the Mexican nation. It determines the idea of mothers as nurturers, protectors, devout women who are meant to cement the notion of the home, the caring of children, and tending to their husband's needs. At the same time, Valeria's visits to the gynecologists also start to constrict and frame her. In order for the pregnancy to run smoothly, the physician checks up on her body changes. If she conforms to standard weight increases expected during her pregnancy, if she's following an ideal diet, if she's taking care of herself as the vessel of the baby. Because of this, the gynecologist advises Valeria to stop working making furniture, as this would put a strain on her body and on the baby. The physician's medical discourse is disturbingly framed by its clinical setting. The gynecologist's office is clean, almost white, very clinical, sorry about the redundancy, and the idealization of the woman's body. Behind his desk, as you can see in the image, he collects reproductions of sculptures of women from classical antiquity. His prescription is always given from his male perspective, controlling through the voice of medicine how a woman should behave. When Valeria starts to crumble down to the pressure of her bodily changes and the stress of meeting up to these expectations of who she should be, her partner Raul chides her for not being rational. She accuses her of being hysterical, and he is concerned about her mental health. He even considers putting her in a mental institution in an attempt to control her. Raul fails to understand Valeria's fears, and there comes this moment when he decides to stop listening to her, looking for advice from his own mother and the gynecologist. At a later appointment, Raul, his mother, and the physician decide that what is best for Valeria is to take antidepressants, as long as the medicine does not hurt the baby. They never ask Valeria if this is what she wants. Her mother-in-law also confines a sense of resignation. She tries to calm Valeria down by trying to be sympathetic. She tells her that being pregnant is like feeling you are being split in half, and that when the baby is born, it feels as if all the bones in her body are cracking and breaking. In the end, she claims it is worth it, that the feeling of dread passes because motherhood is something worth achieving and feeling grateful for. They even read a book about motherhood that Valeria's neighbor had given her, where they read motivational phrases such as "You are the adventure of my life," as you can see in the image to the right. And I really love it because with soft pastel and like very light colors that I think fits very well with the physician's office as well. Valeria is not convinced, and this adventure is more constrictive than liberating, imprisoning her in the domestic sphere. A flashback halfway through the film reveals that Valeria used to be someone very different when she was a teenager. She was part of a gang. She kept her hair short and dyed it blonde. She had a romantic relationship with her friend Octavia, but she decides to give everything up to pursue a university degree and make her parents proud, like her brother, who is implied was murdered. So that's kind of like an implication or a reference to violence in Mexico. Valeria's goals changed then to improve her social condition, giving her younger rebellious self up to be able to live up to the parental and social expectations. During this flashback sequence, she and her gang are chased by the police. Sirens are heard off screen while the teenagers run together chanting, "We won't be domesticated." I would like to bring back the idea of the projection of undesire here in order to highlight Valeria's contradictory personal journey. On the one hand, there is a desire to improve social status, which means giving up aspects of her identity in order to live up to a specific fantasy of social and economic well-being. On the other, the perspective of motherhood completely clashes with Valeria's own perspective of this well-being. Once she realizes that this comes with additional sacrifices that affect her body, her decisions, and her professional work choices. Her teenage statement rings hollow. Her adult life becomes more and more domesticated, and motherhood is like the deal that will seal the domestic framework. When she turns her workshop into the baby's room, she has to put away her tools, giving up a part of herself that made her feel satisfied. Likewise, when she rummages through the closet, she finds a box of some teenage memorabilia, reminding her of what she has given up to conform to the life she's living now. In contrast with this constricting framework of womanhood and maternity, there is another side that is revealed to us with the help of Aunt Chabela. Chabela believes in Valeria's fears. She takes her to see the brujas, and when Valeria sees that she cannot escape from the monstrous entity that threatens her life and her babies, she takes her to see other brujas to perform a ritual and try to drive the bone woman away. Unlike the medical and religious discourses, the brujas in the film represent another form of knowledge, as well as another form of womanhood. It is one that is marginalized and avoided. When Chabela takes Valeria to see Ursula, the first bruja, the one that cracks the egg, Chabela requests Valeria not to tell her parents they went to see her. But this notion of womanhood, this marginalized witchcraft notion of motherhood, is more in tune with intuition and nature. The brujas are represented by a group of mature women, and it is implied that they are not married. They either never got married or are probably widows. They sense what is haunting Valeria, revealing the fears and desires of the condition of womanhood that torment her. At the same time, they do not demonize her baby. They emphasize the connection between mother and child, and that Valeria's survival depends on her recognition that she has given birth to her baby. This link is what allows the ritual to be performed, and for Valeria to seek for a way to sever herself from the presence of the bone woman. The ritual takes place in this old house far away from the city. And the ritual involves the women surrounding Valeria. They also tie up the baby with a red ribbon. So I'm going to call that a sort of amarre, kind of like trying to maintain the connection between Valeria and her baby. They also try to cleanse Valeria's body with branches and herbs, and they invocate the expelling of the creature. They also set up an effigy that they need to burn up in order to kind of symbolize the way that the Huesera is going to be expelled from Valeria, or the connection is going to be severed. During the ritual, Valeria enters a state of mind where she has to fight herself, her twofold personality that has been at odds since the beginning of her pregnancy. She exits the house and she goes into the forest. And as you can see in the image to the right, she encounters this monstrous conglomeration of broken women, like literally their limbs are broken, they're moving in a very disturbing way. And Valeria cannot escape this conglomeration of women. Even her own leg breaks. It's kind of like an exposed fracture. She's unable to move. And they start to kind of pile up on top of her. It's kind of like devouring her. But at the same time, there is this way of releasing herself, probably her true self, from whatever is binding her. It is thanks to the blanket that she's able to maintain a connection with the real world. And it is this blanket that we see that is connected or associated with her baby. So the effigy burns up, and we can assume that the bone woman has been expelled. The bone woman has disappeared. And Valeria is grateful, she's at peace. And the end of the film is very harrowing and it's very conflicting as well. It involves Valeria renouncing her idealized life. She leaves Raul and her baby behind. And I think it's very significant that she picks up her suitcases, but she also picks up her toolbox with which she used to make furniture with. So the ending is a way, or I don't know, I'm still having trouble with the ending. I see it as a way to settle the conflict of undesire, in which Valeria understands that to save her own family, she has to step away from them. So in order to wrap up, Huesera is a film that presents motherhood as something that breaks the idealized condition of woman, her social and cultural expectations, while at the same time disclosing other forms of feminine identities that are marginalized or that end up being ignored in order to fulfill specific, well-considered roles. And we can keep talking about this. I believe that the horror of Huesera is not the monster itself, but what it reflects, what it represents, what it symbolizes. That restrictive and imprisoning condition that can drive a woman to doubt herself. So I'm going to stop there.
That is a loaded concluding sentence. Which I think as we open up for audience questions, we do have a moderator working with us today. Maybe I'll start us off with that sentence. Where is the true monster in this film? Is it, from the title of the film itself, we expect it to be Huesera, but as you mentioned, she's not very physically present in many of the shots, but is this veil or this cloud throughout the film. So I was thinking about, I was trying to explain this to my class, what kind of horror film and what possible triggers that they could face in attending today's talk and watching the film. And it was almost in the same vein that you mentioned, pregnancy as body horror. And I said to them, it's horror that is inscribed onto the body, or body as horror. And now after your talk, it's also the psychological scape of it all, of the fears, of the anxieties, and where those fears and anxieties come from. And I was wondering if you just wanted to run with that and your concluding statement.
Yeah, I think the way that you've also talked about the idea of pregnancy as body horror, I think we can see it in, like, it's very evident in kind of like Western film tradition. One of the reviewers was talking about, I think it was Peter Bradshaw, who was talking about Polanski's Repulsion and Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, which is also pregnancy as body horror, and also kind of using woman as the vessel, to satisfy certain, her husband's social needs, economic needs as well, and sacrificing her to darker forces, right? I'm also thinking about The Brood as well, Cronenberg's The Brood, in which we can see this monstrous kind of babies that are being born, and they're kind of like the projection of the woman's kind of frustrations about her marriage, about her social condition, etc. And I think, like, the Huesera is very interesting because I think it does inherit, those elements from that type of body horror that you're talking about. But I think the way that I was reading it, I think it was a bit more, I can sense psychoanalysis here, but I was trying to be very careful not to go into that. I was reading Barbara Creed, The Monstrous Feminine, but I think Barbara Creed is very problematic. It kind of doesn't work very well for this film, because Barbara Creed is obviously like, The Monstrous Feminine is like a male projection of, the fear of the great mother, the phallic mother, and we can see all these horrible, abject things happening. But I think it would be difficult to apply it here, because it's a film written by a woman, directed by a woman, about the issues of pregnancy and the expectations of what it is to be a woman. So even though the body is highlighted in many of the elements of the film, I think it's as you were saying, the psychological aspect, the toll that it takes on Valeria, in the way that she just feels it's just too much for her, right? Like, she really wants to do it, but at the same time she realizes it's not exactly what she expected or wanted. And I think for me, the real monster is kind of like the whole social and cultural conventions surrounding the expectations of pregnancy. I found, like, both the times that I've watched the film, that for me, like, the scenes that are really make me cringe and make me so uncomfortable is when Valeria is confronted by her sister, telling her that she's not a good mother, that she's not doing a good job. When they go to the gynecologist, I thought that was so cringy as well. It was so uncomfortable. And when I realized that, like, the gynecologist had like all these statues or reproductions of statues behind, I just went, oh, that's so terrible. So it's kind of like Valeria really wants to be there. There's kind of like a sense of trying to improve her social status in a way. She wants to get away from, this working class neighborhood, but it all kind of like comes with the price, kind of like giving up her desire, her real identity, everything. And I think that's why the part of the film where the teenager, in the flashback, the teenager scream, "We will not be domesticated." I think that's the problem. Like, Valeria, in the end, is kind of being domesticated. So I think it's kind of like all the social and cultural conventions. What I also found that's why I decided also to open the talk with the initial, the opening sequence, because I just found it so disturbing, going up to the shrine, the monumental figure looking down on you, looking at you. I just found it so disturbing. So I think it's those conventions that, because of the presence of the Huesera, become a bit more salient, and we come to try to understand what is it where the real horror is, in a sense.
Yeah, it's that contraposition, that opening scene that at the statue of La Virgen de Guadalupe, which is essentially this unobtainable ideal of motherhood, right? And that is the ideal that these external expectations are being, this isn't really great English, but expected from the good mother, the good woman, to fulfill. And they're unobtainable ideals. That's the perfect mother. And then, of course, in the Mexican cultural imaginary, the opposite is la malinche, la llorona, the bad mother, the murderous mother. And yet, I kind of got the feeling that Cervera was working with this idea of, well, where is the good enough mother? Like, where can Valeria fit without having to sacrifice her desire? Because at one point, Raul doesn't see her as a sexual being anymore, and she feels dismissed. And now that I'm saying that, she gets that back with Octavia, which, as a lesbian relationship, that's deviant female behavior. And then the doctor's office visits, to me, were the cringiest. Just like a total dismissal of how she's feeling, how she's progressing. And I was thinking maybe if you could talk a little bit about that and how it culminates in that birthing scene.
Yeah, sorry. I just was trying to think how to write this talk, and I knew I was missing a lot of things because I took so many notes when I was watching the film again. And you're completely right. There's a few things that we need to kind of discuss and talk about here. I completely wrote down in my notes, yes, there is a moment when Raul stops seeing her, stops satisfying her sexual desires. And I think it's also very contradictory because he just goes like, what if we hurt the baby? And she just goes, but there's no baby yet. And he just goes, no, it's inside of you. And it's like, it's so terrifying in the way that there is this kind of displacement kind of, and not displacement, but he, like, Raul stands away. And as you say, he does not see her as a sexual being or as a sexual woman with sexual desires, but just, again, as a body, as a vessel, right, that needs to be taken care of. And I think it fits very well with this idea of, and I also had to overlook that in the talk, that she gets back with Octavia. They see each other again on Mother's Day. They encounter themselves again on the street. And then she goes looking for her because of the fact that Raul is not satisfying her sexually. I really like the fact that you're talking about the lesbian relationship as a deviant female behavior, but at the same time, it is like, it also highlights the idea of kind of making the division of how a masculine discourse does not understand woman's desire and woman's sexuality, and that being with Octavia, even though it deviates from this kind of cultural norm that she kind of wants to stay in, it is Octavia who satisfies her sexually, but emotionally as well. After the whole thing at her parents' house, when the bone woman, the Huesera appears and she hurts her nephew and niece, and she has like a spat with her sister, she runs out of her parents' house and she goes back to Octavia, and Octavia is also able to take care of her. At the same time, Octavia, and I would like to say that, I would like to highlight that because I think it fits very well with the ending of the film. Octavia is also very upset with Valeria because it's this idea, what is it that you want, right? You're not, as you were saying, you're standing on both sides, but you cannot fulfill both sides fully, right? You cannot be everything here. And even Octavia reprimands her and says, we cannot do this, right? You've chosen your path, you've chosen your way, and that is where she goes into labor into this underground concert. I think it's absolutely fascinating the way that She's being overwhelmed by all these sights and sounds in this house because the sound is too loud. I think there's a moment, I think if we pay much attention, you can hear her water breaking, I think. And it just cuts to this very clinical space. And I think it's a very disturbing and terrifying scene where Valeria's head, like the shot, it's a long shot, I think. Or a long medium shot where we see, all the gynecologist, the nurses, Raul as well, kind of like very excited, I think, about it. And Valeria is just like, her head is thrown out and her head is just like screaming out loud, distorted, maybe also because of the angle. And it's kind of like on the corner, completely separated from what is going on the other side, on the birthing side, as you say. And she cannot bear it. She cannot bear it. And it's something that it was also foreboded when her mother-in-law speaks to her, as I was saying. You're going to feel like your body is going to collapse, right? It's going to be the most horrible thing. And the thing is, like, the joy doesn't come, right? She's always kind of like completely detached from the baby. We see another scene where Raul is holding the baby in the hospital, and he says, "Look, it's your baby," and she just turns around. She's just too, or I think she's just too tired after the ordeal of giving birth, and we don't realize exactly, how. We're completely detached from these experiences, and I think it fits very well with another thing that I was thinking about that I missed, that I didn't talk about, is when they do the ultrasound and both Raul and the gynecologist just go, "Oh, there's the baby, you can see the head and you can see the arm." And when Valeria tries to look at the ultrasound image, she just doesn't see anything. She just sees kind of like a very distorted image that looks, I don't know, I think everyone sees something different. I saw something very monstrous and diabolic. And I think that's also her projection on how she cannot cope with the idea of, the whole situation, but she still wants to go through with it in a sense.
Yeah, I was thinking of that scene also, and this underlying thread of, with the pregnancy, that she feels very much disconnected from her body. That you use the word vessel, and when I was making my own notes watching the film, I started using the word incubator, where I think vessel still uses that nice Christian appreciation to, the virginal mother figure and giving birth. And I didn't get that from this film because of that psychological scape that we really get to see with Valeria, starting with the ultrasound. She doesn't see anything. When she wants to have sexual intercourse with Raul, and he goes, "Oh, I don't want to hurt the baby." And she's like, "There is no baby." He's like, yeah, there is a. So like these external reminders that she is carrying a child is, I'm thinking Silvia Federice's work in Caliban and the Witch, where she focuses on women's reproductive labor. And really that resonated with me with this film. Valeria's disconnection from her own body was almost like emphasizing that this is her fulfilling this sociocultural role, expectation of women as the reproductive labor, and what that means for the family and for society. And to me, that scene in the hospital, I think the most, and excuse the pun, bone-chilling scene of her, that shot from behind her head, where it's that medium long shot, and you actually see her entire face because she's distorted or contorted in such a way. That to me was the most of the bone cracking, the bone breaking intensity of the film. And then just how that long shot, once the baby is born, which is a daughter, ironically, you can pick up on that. And then everyone, all the men disappear, take care of the baby, and the last doctor's like, oh, just sew her up. And then you get that medium close-up shot of the nurse. Okay, dear, we're going to sew you up with the needle. And I thought, if you want to expand on that idea, because I think she really does a good job of entering this psychological scape, not only of, you know, the sociocultural codes being inscribed here, but you mentioned earlier, postpartum depression.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything that you're saying as well. And I thought it was very interesting the way that you identified the word incubator and I identified the word vessel, and how it all fits with this kind of like Christian tradition of, you know, the bearing of the child, and even probably the sanctity of bearing a child. You know, it's kind of like comes from the Virgin Mary as well. And I think what really frustrates Valeria as well is that they don't see her, like, when she starts to get pregnant, when she's pregnant, she starts to realize that they don't see her for herself. They only see her for what she's carrying. And I think that's quite disheartening for her. And I think that also kind of pushes her own stress and her own depression even further away. In the sense that she, even though she's really striving to fulfill this kind of social and cultural expectations of or requirements, she still cannot do it, right? Like her sister is saying, oh, you're not a good mother, like you dropped a baby, like you're going to drop your baby. I think that's really horrible to say to someone, right? But at the same time, I really like, I like that you mentioned and you went back to the scene of the birth, because I think it's also very, I think that's a lot of body horror as well. The way that it's kind of like clinically alleviated, if you say so, because, you know, you're in this sanitary space, this hospital space, where supposedly medicine is saying how to deliver a baby the best way possible, but that still a woman's body will suffer from tearing, from expansion, from deflation, and it's not just giving birth to the baby. You also have to expose, it's the expulsion of the placenta as well. And the whole idea of like, oh, you know, we're going to sew you up. You've been broken as well. You've been split apart, split open. And I think that provides us with, you know, the way that, in a way, motherhood has been idealized and normalized, but it has also been kind of like clinically kind of sanitized. That's the word that I was looking for. And the film kind of shows shows it in a, I want to say, in a slanted way, you know, the way that the angle of that take with Valeria screaming, you know, it just distorts every idealization and every kind of comfort that we have in this sanitized version of giving birth, of, you know, of birthing a child. At the same time, as you were saying, and I was also thinking about Silvia Federici, but I just couldn't put it in my thoughts when I was preparing this. But completely, it's just like Federici talks about the way women become regulated in this modern capitalist world. And as we are looking at it, it's basically kind of like not becoming, but turning into these elements that are there to bear more children, to keep the society going, etc. And yes, she gives birth to a daughter, so her daughter is going eventually to pass through all of that. One of the other things that I was also thinking about when you were, you know, talking about all this whole situation is the way that Valeria is also, her passivity is becoming more highlighted. Oh, you cannot do this. Oh, you're pregnant. Oh, you have to take care of yourself. Oh, you don't have to strain yourself. oh, you don't have to work hard. So I think she also feels this frustration in terms of that they're not letting her do anything basically, but just do kind of like the menial domestic work that doesn't require a lot of, a lot of strength, because that cannot be associated with the body of mother, right? I think it's very frustrating for her when I was talking about this idea, like she works hard, like she makes furniture. I think that those are beautiful scenes as well. She's very satisfied with the work that she does, but it kind of like there's a moment where they kind of like cut her off from these activities that are very I would say I would like to say that they're considered very masculine. It's kind of like very masculine hard work, and she's being shunned from that because she has to fit it with this role of motherhood. And I find it also very interesting that Octavia, like, she's a box trainer, I think. So that's another kind of like, it's a very masculine sport, or we associate it more with masculinity. So again, it's kind of, as I was saying, I couldn't fill it in very well. The film, it's all about these contrasts and kind of the representation of different forms of womanhood. But the problem is this specific womanhood that kind of bears down on her, in order for her, I kind of think, for her to keep herself in the middle class, in the middle class society, because that's where she has fought to be there, right? And this is like, well, I'll become a mother. That's pretty much what I need to do, which I think is terrifying. And I think it's this idea of giving in that also kind of makes her, unleashes the whole monstrous thing. Well, the entity. I also wanted to mention that I feel the film can also be associated with Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper. Yeah. Specifically about this idea of postpartum depression and this idea of like, you're only there to take care of the baby. And that's basically what we get to see after the baby is born. And we see this detachment all the time. We see that it really weighs on Valeria all the time. Like, Raul is just like also excited, like, oh, you want to hold the baby, like the baby wants to feed, wants to eat and everything. And she's just like, oh God, my nipples are sore. I cannot sleep. The baby's crying so much all the time. And I think it's, she feels a complete detachment, right? And I really like the way, and I would say, and that's something that I highlighted at the end of my talk, that even the witches notice that the only way to save themselves is for Valeria to acknowledge her connection with her child, with her daughter. It's the only way that they can get rid of the Huesera, right? But at the very end, it's a choice that she has to personally make in order for not to hurt anyone anymore, for her well-being and for the well-being of Raul and the baby. But I think the witches, I wouldn't say the witches are against childbearing. I think, the idea of witches and how do you say it? The women that are in charge of helping bear children. Midwives, midwives and witches are kind of associated as well. Mm-hmm. So like the brujas, they really emphasize this connection, something that Valeria has to really come to realize in order to kind of escape from this thing that is tormenting her. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah. I just had an aha moment as you said that. It's a full circle, no? It's a full circle, because the disconnection she was feeling throughout the pregnancy, it comes to, well, until you accept that this was part of your body, and you gave birth as an active participant, agentic participant, which she hasn't had, not in the labor in the hospital, not in the doctor's appointments, not in walking in on her mother-in-law and husband deciding to put her in an institution. She hasn't had agency at all. And like you said, she gives up the one thing that gives her pleasure, which is her carpentry. And until she takes that as part of her agentic production, rather than going back to Sylvia Federici, as opposed to reproduction duty. She can't come into her, or she can't come into, or she can't come back to herself, right? Because I'm thinking Huesera, she takes all the body parts to remake her. And I thought that scene where the link is the blanket that she crocheted for her own child is the anchor to bring her back, is very telling.
Yeah, I agree completely with you. And thank you for mentioning that. I think what was missing from my talk is the notion of agency. I think it was there all the time, but it was like naming it, as you were saying, is what really makes it all congeal. And again, as you were saying, the blanket, like she did crochet it, again, it's just like showing that Valeria does want to have a connection, and again, it does reflect on her abilities, her crafting abilities, that, even it might not be building furniture, but in this sense, she can do it to create a connection with the baby that she's going to have. And it's basically that link that, maybe the purpose of that blanket, that she made it on purpose for the baby, that she has to remind herself of the intention and the aim to be able to recognize her own her own will in this decision that she made. And, as I kept saying, she insists that she wanted to do it. She really wanted to have a baby. But the problem is the whole situation surrounding the notion or idea of having a baby. And I think the opening sequence, as you were saying, sets up this idea of how motherhood and pregnancy should be. And she's kind of like, maybe we just didn't have to do this. Like, I would have gotten pregnant anyway. But, it starts from the very beginning, weighing down and stressing her all the time. But it's kind of, again, it's the social discourse regulated by religion, regulated by medicine, regulated by the male gaze or the male use of reason. And that's pretty much what imprisons her. And I really like the double nature of the spider when the bruja tells her about that, because she says, a spider it's very motherly and very nurturing, but it's also very destructive. And the cobweb is this thing of protection, very resistant. That's what a cobweb is. But at the same time, it can be your own prison. So it's that duality that she really has to struggle throughout the film. But it's not that it's one thing or the other. I think she really needs to learn how to kind of work with her own understanding of who should she be as a woman.
Definitely. And I find sometimes if we're looking at these sociocultural prefiguratives to what motherhood and womanhood should be, the discussion or the depiction tends to be still very binary, one or the other. And that intermediary liminal in-between space, well, what do you do with that space if you're not one or the other? And that in-between space is, I think, where she's caught. And it's an in-between space, I think, that the film explores nicely by also bringing in the witchcraft, right? So here's the real world and how I am in the real world, but here's this alternative space, which is quite feminine space of witchcraft, with mother figures, the older women, that allow her that space to go into the in-between space to find herself. And it's painful. and it's difficult, but in the end, it's almost like a rebirth scene for herself. And I think I can't recall. It's that scene of her emerging from the burning effigy on the floor is foreshadowed at the beginning of the film, I believe.
I was just taking down notes, sorry. I was thinking about the whole idea, as you were saying, of how she finally finds a way of understanding herself through the witches and through the witches' knowledge. And I was thinking of the idea, as I was saying, that they're mature women. And I think the way that they're portrayed is just like, it's just kind of like this idea of femininity that we don't usually associate with or think about. But the mature women, I was just writing down the word, the crones, they're the crones. But they're the ones with experience, they're the ones with knowledge, right? They have, I'm pretty sure that they all have suffered losses. They all have learned from those experiences. And it is because that they understand fully well the contradictions of all these notions and ideas of this binary, right, that they are tied into. They are the ones who are able to help Valeria more efficiently than the antidepressants that the doctor prescribes, right? Or even Valeria's mother, who is very, very pious, very religious, or even Raul's mother, like Valeria's mother-in-law, who was like, get on with it. It's going to be horrible, but, get on with it. It's kind of like a resignation, basically. And I think the witches provide this other form of understanding in which she goes into this mental state and she realizes pretty much, if she wants to make a certain cut or if she wants to make a certain decision. But it always has to respect the awareness of her having done the action of bearing a child. And I think that's a moment of extreme maturity for Valeria as well. The choice she makes at the end of the film, we might not be very happy with it, but it's her right choice. It's her choice of maturity after all the experiences that she has had, right? And I think it's completely, made possible, as you say, with the brujas as the last resort, right? And I really like it because it's not in the urban space where that is done. It's done far away from the city. Everything happens in the city, but this is done far away from the city, in a kind of like an old house in the forest, etc. But I think it contrasts very well with the beginning of the film, which is very saintly, away from the city, on the hill, monumental statue, very religious. And I really like the way that you made the connection of this idea of rebirth and emerging from the burning. Because when I was watching the film, at the beginning you say, this burning is something foreboding, And as you are saying, it becomes a moment of release, of understanding, of, achieving this, acknowledging the experience. I think that would be the way to put it.
Yeah, it just struck me as just the iconography of the whole ritual, and the blending of that opening ritual to La Virgen de Guadalupe, the iconography there, and then the contraposition to this, what one would suppose as dark, foreboding, something bad is going to emerge from her ritual with the witches. Because even her aunt says, there is a price to pay. There will be a price to pay for this ritual. And I would say it works out for Valeria. As sad as we may take on, like you say, we may not agree with her decision, but here's where that agency comes back but it's her decision. Because what choices has she had? She hasn't really had many choices. And I keep going back, like the use of these female archetypes throughout. You've got the mean sister, the judgmental mother, you know, the veneration to La Virgen, the you know, the perfect mother. You've got the loving aunt, who might just be a lesbian, but we really don't know, who has this alternative value system, which is more of the natural witchcraft, linking it back to the feminine. Whereas the mother and the sister really police and enforce the dominant sociocultural discourse, right? So, and then of course we have, you know, the lesbian lover, and how all of those really represent what you've been talking about, which is womanhood and motherhood, and how sometimes there can be a sisterhood of love, of nurturing, and it seems it comes from the alternative side, so witchcraft and lesbian love, whereas the real world is the judgmental, unobtainable ideals of what happens when you don't measure up to those ideals and expectations. And then we see what happens to a woman placed in that situation.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I was thinking, as you were saying, I also want to highlight that it's the mothers in the film who are the judgmental ones, right? Because it's even Raul's mother too, who is being judgmental. I really like when they're like looking at the crib at the department store. It's like, oh, you're going to make the crib. Like, here it is. It's ready made. You know, don't stress yourself, right? And I think it's something that also kind of works with this contradictory nature that Valeria is trying to figure out. Like, okay, I'm pregnant. I can make the crib for my baby. I wouldn't allow anybody else to do it. Why does society restrict her in that sense, right? And I think it's also very sad because it's that restriction, that chiding, that oh God, I was trying, like they're kind of looking down upon her, that stresses her, and you know, releases the Huesera, and the crib that she made is burned, which I think is also very, very sad. It's kind of like giving up completely, giving up herself completely. And on the other side, as you're saying, like her aunt, Chavela, who I think is like a wonderful character in the film. I think like she's so great because she kind of comes along. She goes to the shrine, she's there, and like she's being mocked at. You know, the mother says like, "Oh, you don't want to end up like your aunt, like not married, no children," and she goes like, well, "Why do you care?" But at the same time, it's the aunt that is the only woman that believes her truly. Like, I saw the Huesera, and she says, "Yes, I believe you." And I really want to also highlight the fact that what you were saying, that you know, the ritual, the bigger ritual comes with a price, and we like the aunt shows a scar on her body, so we kind of assume that it's going to be a bodily price, basically. But in the end, it comes with a price of understanding that you have to let something go in order to, you know, in order to fulfill yourself, or even in order to protect the ones you love as well. So that's the price of the ritual in the end. It's not a bodily price, but it's a price, as you were saying, of having to make that choice. And in the end, we don't know if Valeria is going to end up with Octavia. I think that's up for grabs. Like, she really apologizes to Octavia, but I wouldn't want to believe that she goes back to her, but she really still needs more time to truly understand herself in order to be what she really wants to be.
I totally agree with you on that. I think she tried the hetero relationship with the husband, fulfilling the expectation of being a mother, and etc., etc. And then she tried the non-hetero relationship with Octavia, but really not fully committing either because she's still married. That I'm more inclined to think that this is a personal, solitary journey that she started to really find herself before she becomes someone for someone else, because she hasn't really had that solitary, self-defining, this is who I am, and then find her partner or whatever it may be and become a person for the other person. And that takes us back to the whole domestication, right? And I keep thinking, as I was watching those parts, I kept thinking of the saying, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That entrapment in the domestic space, her feeling the spider web, she's caught in the spider web, right? And it can be both entrapping and predatory, empowering predatory. But the whole idea that she really just needs to find herself first, without all these externals, expectations or opinions or images telling her what she should be. And I found, yeah, it's a difficult situation, but it's better late than never. And maybe that is the message, the takeaway message from the film. I'm not too sure. I'm still working on that idea. But what do you think, in your opinion, or what was your takeaway from the film as a whole narrative? What would you say were the main points that you're taking away from this film? Because it's quite a heavy film.
It is. Like, I was watching it again, and I just went, it's just so complex, as you were saying in our conversation. The amount of elements and symbolisms that are also connected like a web as well throughout the narrative makes it very difficult, or no, I think it makes us understand the complexity of the issue that is being addressed in the film. And I think probably one of the feelings that I was having while watching the film, I think in both times that I was watching the film, was the immense frustration. It's a film about being frustrated all the time. And I think it's this idea of, you know, there must be an end. Like, you cannot feel frustrated all the time, trying to satisfy the other, right? You know, the others or the other, right? And I think that's pretty much where it leads us to. It will sink you in. It will sink you deep into the problem, the depression, the fear, the anguish, the stress, you know, up to the point of hurting yourself, both physically and psychologically. But at the same time, it is this realization that, as you were saying, you have to find yourself first in order to really kind of see where you're going. And I think in a way, the film is not also intersectional, it's very queer. It provides us with a very queer reading of not just womanhood, but maternity as well. In the way that it has been, as we were saying through our conversation and in the talk that I was doing, that it's just so restricted with this binarism that it doesn't allow for any other possibility of what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a woman mother, if you want to call that. And I think the film in the end gives us this idea of the ability to choose, and probably to try to see an other alternative that is not restrained to the binary conditions of you know, our civilization or society, our culture, basically. So it's kind of very frustrating, but at the same time, there is this feeling that there is possibility for, I would like to say, empowerment. I don't know, but I think there's the film gives this possibility, or hints to this possibility.
And I think that's a great positive note to end our talk today. I'd like to thank you again, Enrique, for giving us your time and presenting on this wonderful film. I know I'm taking away a lot of ideas and questions still about the film and what it means and what it could mean. And thank you again for a wonderful presentation. And hopefully we'll see each other soon, I think.
Yeah, hopefully very soon. And thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And, you know, it was a lot of fun. Thank you. It was a great conversation. And I hope that you enjoyed my ideas as well. Thank you so much.